Hello everyone. In this video, I'll show you how I made a 3D fish-shaped cake. If you're interested, keep watching. I made the fish cake using the ingredients for a honey cake, Medovic. You can use any other sponge cake or any other recipe you like. Or you can use my honey cake recipe. The recipe is on my channel. I'll leave a link in the description below the video. I printed out a picture of a fish on regular paper, the ones I needed. Using this picture, I cut out cake layers from rolled out dough, baked them, and assembled them with cream. Be sure to let the cake rest for a couple of hours to stabilize so it's easier to work with later. The fish is quite low in height. We need to make sure there are not just cake layers in this cake, but that it's a full-fledged cake. That's why, in my opinion, honey cake is the best option. To make it easier to work with, cut, and trim, you can even put the cake in the freezer for 30 minutes. Once the cake is slightly frozen, it will be easier to trim and shape. You need to trim it and make the shape more rounded on all sides. Leave the tail and the side where the head is a bit lower and flatter. Leave the middle part thicker, but it all depends on the type of fish you've chosen. You should look at what this fish looks like in real life and then trim the cake to get the right shape. You also need to trim the bottom part so that the fish looks more natural. Once we've shaped it, the cake needs to be covered with any buttercream or ganache. Any cream that is suitable for covering with fondant will work. We need to isolate the cake so that the fondant doesn't absorb moisture. I'm using a Swiss meringue buttercream. The recipe is available on the channel and there will also be a link in the video description. We don't need a thick layer of cream here, just enough to isolate the cake. Next, here I have modeling chocolate, or more accurately, plasticine chocolate. I also have a video on my channel showing how to make this modeling chocolate. All the links will be in the video description below. From this mass, I'm shaping part of the head. This is so that I can make this part of the head look more realistic. If we try to carve it out of the cake, it will be harder to achieve a more natural look. I'm attaching a piece of this modeling chocolate. I'm making a cut here. This will be where the mouth is slightly open. Then you need to put it in the freezer so this chocolate mass hardens. After that, we trim and cut it to a more suitable size. I left it in the freezer for too long. Now my chocolate has hardened completely like a rock. This chocolate mass is harder to cut. Ideally, of course, 5 to 10 minutes is enough. Touch it when the chocolate mass has set, holds its shape well, isn't soft, but hasn't frozen solid yet. That's when it's convenient to cut and trim everything. Here too, I use a printed picture of this fish and look at how much I need to cut off, what the fish's head looks like. If you use regular fondant, of course, you have to wait longer for it to set before you can work with it further. That's why I prefer to use a stable, firm mass for such elements. This can be either modeling chocolate or special modeling fondant. It's based on cocoa butter, sets very quickly, and is convenient to work with. But the fastest option is to make modeling chocolate. For this, all you need is chocolate and sugar syrup or honey. Experiencing a deeply anxious feeling? Next, I prepared the fondant. I always use homemade fondant for covering cakes. I recommend not rolling it out too thin. This is so that it will be easier to work with the mesh later on. I go over this fondant with a rolling pin, music. This is so the fondant isn't just smooth, but creates a scale-like effect. You can buy this kind of mesh either at hardware stores where it's sold separately, or you can find it in stores where fruits and vegetables are sold in such mesh bags. I lay the fondant on and smooth it out. When working with fondant, it's convenient to wear vinyl gloves. That way the fondant doesn't stick to your hands. Trim off all the excess, but not too close to the cake itself because the fondant can shrink a little. You need to leave a couple of millimeters so you can tuck them under the cake. But if you cut off too much, you can slowly stretch it a bit more afterward. That's why it's very important not to roll the fondant too thin. If you've noticed, many pastry chefs who work with fondant cakes use a fairly thick layer of fondant. And it's not to make the cake significantly heavier, but to make it much easier and truly more beautiful to create different details, such as intricate designs and decorative elements. Next, you'll need various tools, but if you don't have special ones, you can find something handy around the house. I place the printed fish template on top and roughly mark where the gills and eyes will be. I mark various more pronounced areas, such as these lines. I press down on the mouth so that it stays slightly open. In those places where I marked these lines, you need to slightly lift the fondant, creating a kind of raised edge, so that the surface isn't flat. You need to lift the fondant like this. If the fondant is thin, this will be difficult to do. Mine is actually too thin here. When I made this fish for the first time, I left the fondant layer thicker and it was much easier to highlight these lines. But this time, the second time, I overdid it a bit and rolled the fondant out too thin. And then, of course, it becomes much harder to make all these details, impressions, and cut lines. Next, using a pastry tip, just a round tip, or you can even use a cocktail straw, we make these impressions like scales all over the surface of the fish. Next, we move on to these elements. These will be the tail and fins. To make sure the tail holds well, not just lying flat but raised, we definitely add CMC powder to the fondant. It helps the fondant dry quickly. The fondant dries out very, very quickly and holds its shape. I take a piece of fondant, place the printed fish picture on it, and cut out a tail in roughly that shape. And I make these stripes. Fondant sticks together very well with just plain water. You need to moisten the fondant with water to create a smoother transition. That way the fondant quickly sticks and bonds into a single piece. Of course, the fondant won't dry immediately. You need to put something in place so it holds its shape and angle. I added another piece of fondant underneath, which I'll cut off later. But for now, to keep the tail raised, the fondant will help support it, and you can trim off the excess later. After just about 30 minutes have passed, you can carefully cut off all of the excess fondant. To make a glue that holds best, we take a drop of water and heat the fondant in the microwave. We mix the fondant with water and we get a very moist, soft fondant that turns into a glue which holds well and sets quickly. It's very convenient to attach different fondant elements with it. But always remember that fondant sticks to fondant. Additionally, of course, you can make it even more moist by adding water. Chocolate sticks to chocolate. Here I just took a silicone mold and placed it under the tail so that the tail would set in this position. Next, we will also cut the fins out of fondant ourselves. Be sure to add CMC powder to the fondant as well. Roll out the fondant fairly thin, but not too thin, so it doesn't tear. Look at how the fins appear in the picture. And now, using the glue we made, fondant plus water, I attach the top fin. Of course, it won't hold right away. You need to hold it in place for a bit. Also, you need to keep warming this fondant glue so it stays moist and sticky. I have this kind of pastry wire here, and so I don't have to hold the fin. I just poked in some pieces of wire to support it. Maybe the fin itself dried pretty quickly. It's already holding well. It just needs to stick to the cake itself. And on both the top and bottom, I apply this moist fondant with water, which acts like glue. And everything else is the same. We look at the picture to see what the other fins look like. And in the same way, we cut them out and attach them. Once all the main work is done, all that's left is to paint the fish the right color. Since I chose a perch cake, and perch are kind of yellow and green, I take water-soluble food coloring, mix a little green, a little yellow, and add some glitter. You can add pearlescent food coloring if you have it, but if not, you can use some kind of glitter to make the fish look more natural since it's shiny. And I use a brush to go over the entire surface, but in the area where the belly is, we leave it lighter, almost white. If you added too much coloring somewhere, it's not a big deal. Just take, I forgot to mention that we dilute the food coloring with vodka. And where there's too much coloring and you want a lighter shade, you can just take a drop of vodka and use a clean brush to go over it, kind of cleaning it up and removing the excess coloring. This fish, the perch, has a tail and fins that are a reddish-orange color. I also dilute the water-soluble coloring and paint the fins and tail. As you can see, the fins and tail are already pretty dry, and they don't smudge from the coloring with vodka. Next, we need to make the black stripes. Here too, we take water-soluble black coloring, add some pearlescent coloring to make it shine, and create stripes like the ones in the printed picture. Where the head is, I also add shades like this to create color transitions and shadows. I colored the top fin with a silver color. First a bit of yellow, and then I went over it with a silvery pearl coloring. This is a dry coloring, like glitter, because fish fins are actually very shiny in real life. I roll a small ball out of white fondant, add the eye, and brush the sides with a black brush, also adding a bit of shading so it's not just plain white fondant. On top, I place a small piece of black fondant again, and to create a highlight in the eye, I add a tiny dot of white fondant onto the black fondant. The fish is painted, now it needs to be put in the fridge and allowed to dry completely. After that, once everything is dry, you can remove the wires that were holding up the top fin. My cake spent the night in the fridge. The food coloring has dried completely and merged with the fondant. And now you can go over it. Decorating with gel gives it a shine. The decor gel gives it such a natural, slippery look, just like a real fish. I don't have a recipe for decor gel on my channel yet, but I will definitely add it soon and show you how I make it. But I know that decor gel is also sold in pastry shops. You can also use any other gel that's meant to give a glossy finish. Since the fondant has dried and the coloring has set, when you apply the decor gel, the color doesn't smudge, so you can confidently brush on the warmed, not too hot but fairly warm, decor gel, because when it's warm, it's liquid. Go over the entire surface with a brush, including the fins, so that the whole fish looks shiny and slippery like this. And now look at what we've got. At first it seemed very difficult, but overall it's not that hard. The most important thing is to see what this fish looks like when it's alive. I looked at different pictures to see how it looks, the approximate colors, the general shape. That makes it easier to work. I think the result is very good. This fish I made weighs 2 kilograms, including the fondant. Without the fondant, it was about 1.8 kilograms. Don't be afraid to experiment, delight your loved ones, and surprise your guests. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. This helps the channel grow, and I'll be able to share even more recipes, ideas, and experiments with you. We can even pick up this fish without a cake board. The fondant has dried and everything is holding together very well. If we're making the cake in one day, it absolutely needs to sit like this with the fondant for at least 5 hours. It's better to leave it in the fridge overnight. Let it dry and set there. Everything will hold together nicely. And here I added a shot with the second fish as well. I made the perch twice. The first time I made it, it was less than 2 kilograms, and the second time I made the fish a bit bigger. And here you can see a slice of the honey cake with a berry layer and sour cream buttercream. A long time ago, I also made a pike cake. And back then, I didn't show how I made the fish's head. In exactly the same way, I took a piece of modeling chocolate and added it to the cake. And then you can make a slightly open mouth. For the pike, I even made an open mouth with teeth. And if you make the head out of the cake itself, it will be very difficult to create an open mouth like that. It just won't hold together as well.